Hey guys, welcome back to T-Bones Tech. In this video, we are going to be comparing the EFS 24mm F2.8 against the Canon EF 50mm F1.8. The biggest differences between these two lenses is that one is an EFS and one is an EF. So this 24mm lens is going to work great with any Rebel camera. It's going to work great with a Canon 80D and a Canon 7D Mark II. However, it will not work with Canon cameras like the Canon 6D or the Canon 5D Mark III. But the 50mm EF lens, on the other hand, is going to work perfect with full-frame cameras, and it's also going to work great with cameras with APS-C size sensors. But when you're using this 50mm lens with cameras with APS-C size sensors, such as this Canon Rebel SL2, you're going to have to apply a 1.6 times crop factor to the focal length. So putting this 50mm lens on the Canon SL2 is going to give us an equivalent focal length of 80mm, which is actually going to be pretty great for portraiture. Now, to demonstrate this principle, we have a full-frame Canon 6D with the 50mm. We have it set up on this tripod, and we're just going to snap a picture. Here's the picture that we took. Take a look at the table here in the bottom left corner of the screen, and then take a look at the top of the tree here in the top right screen. Now we're going to take the same picture, but with a Canon T7i, which has an APS-C sensor. Taking a look at the back of the T7i, we can instantly see that it zoomed in a lot more than the full-frame camera was. And that's thanks to the 1.6 times crop factor that APS-C size cameras have. Here is the picture taken with the T7i, and we can instantly see that it zoomed in a lot more than the picture taken with the full-frame 6D. And I really hope this demonstrates that shooting with the 50mm lens on an APS-C size camera is indeed going to give you the equivalent focal length of 80mm, and that's definitely something to keep in mind when comparing the 24mm EFS lens against the 50mm EF lens. So to do this comparison properly, all the video and photos that you're going to see in this video were taken with cameras with APS-C size sensors, so none of the pictures with the 50mm lens are going to be shot with this Canon 6D. Now that we have that over with, we are going to pop on this 24mm lens on our B-roll scene to help you guys get a good idea of the field of view of this 24mm lens. So we have the 24mm lens mounted on a Canon EOS M50, and this is what the field of view is going to look like. As you guys can see, it's very wide. You can actually see some of my studio lighting in this scene. So this scene is being recorded at f2.8. Make sure to check out how wide this shot is, and make sure to check out how these lights are blurred or not blurred in this particular shot, because we're going to be switching over to the Canon 50mm right now. Alright, so now the video that you're seeing right now is being recorded with the 50mm F1.8 lens. The aperture that we're using right now is F1.8. Make sure to, again, check out how wide this shot is, and then make sure to take a look at how the bokeh looks here on this flower. As you can see, there's a huge difference between the 24mm EFS lens and the 50mm EF lens when it comes to focal length. This camera shot is very tight, and the camera is still about 3 feet away. So this is how the different focal lengths look like. We're going to switch back to our A-roll scene now. Both the 24 and 50mm lens have Canon's STM autofocus, which makes autofocusing during video a breeze, and it's also very snappy for when taking photos. The video that you're seeing right now is filmed with Canon's 24mm F2.8 lens, and the camera body used to film this video was the Canon 80D. Right now I'm moving the camera around to focus on different objects to show how the 24mm STM focusing works with the Canon 80D's dual pixel AF. And as you can see, it really does a great job at autofocusing during video. The video is definitely a little bit shaky, and that's because it was completely handheld. We are now filming with the 50mm. As you guys can probably notice, the video is getting a little bit more shaky, and that's because we're using a longer focal length. But the 50mm STM autofocusing system is doing an absolutely fantastic job, just like the 24mm. So as far as autofocusing during video, I'd say they're just about the same. The only real difference is going to be their focal lengths. One's 24 and one's 50. I'd say for most video production, I would rather choose a nice wide 24mm lens over a 50mm lens. But of course, it all depends on what you are planning on shooting. The minimum focus distance on this 24mm F2.8 is 0.52 feet, so about 6 inches. And that means you can get extremely close to your subject. And of course, the video that you're watching right now is indeed the minimum focusing distance of this 24mm lens. To help you put that in perspective, here we have the Canon 50mm lens, and its minimum focusing distance is 1.1 feet. That's around 13 inches. And again, here is a video example of the 50mm's minimum focusing distance. As far as weight goes, the 24mm lens is definitely lighter. It comes in at 125 grams. Now the 50mm F1.8 lens comes in at 159 grams, so there really isn't a big weight difference between both of these lenses. They are both really lightweight. As far as build quality goes, both these lenses are made out of very high quality materials. Both have all metal lens mounts, which is really nice to see, especially at this price point. The 50mm is about twice as big as the 24, but both these lenses are still extremely small, so I don't think it's going to make a big difference. The 50mm has a 49mm filter size, and the 24mm has a 52mm filter size. Now for the bokeh test, the first picture here was shot with the 24mm F2.8 lens, so the fastest this lens can go is F2.8, and normally an F2.8 lens would do a great job at producing bokeh, but it's only a 24mm lens. And as we know, longer focal lengths like 50mm or 85mm are going to give you more separation between your subject and the background, creating better bokeh. But because of the short minimum focusing distance of the 24mm lens, we can get really close to our subject, and it's going to help us get pretty decent bokeh, as you guys can see here. Now moving on to the 50mm, the maximum aperture that we can shoot at is f1.8, so it's an extra stop faster aperture, which is going to give us even better bokeh. That plus the longer focal length of 50mm is a recipe for beautiful bokeh. As far as pricing goes, the 50mm costs $125 on Amazon, and the 24mm EFS lens comes in at around $129. So basically both these lenses cost about the same. But for current pricing and availability, I'm going to leave a link in the description down below, which will take you to Amazon, where you guys are going to get the best, most current up-to-date price. Now it's time to get into the fun pixel peeping part of the video. So this first picture here was shot with the 50mm lens, and the second picture here was shot with the 24mm lens. I tried to line these up as best as possible. So first we're going to take a look at this beautiful bokeh here with the 50mm lens. As you guys can see, it is very circular, and it really just blends in and makes the background look very nice. Then we're going to zoom into this flower here, and we're going to check for some chromatic aberration, which there is definitely a good amount of here. As we can see, it really does follow the edge of the plant, and that's to be expected. This is a very high contrast part of the photo, and that's the reason why I use this picture as an example. If we were to zoom into one of these leaves here that's not in a high contrast area, you can see there's almost no chromatic aberration, so this 50mm lens, when shooting at f2.8, definitely does suffer from chromatic aberration. Now let's check out how the 24mm lens did. Now here's pretty much the same picture, but shot with the 24mm lens. The aperture that we were using here was f2.8. Then we're going to zoom into the leaf right here, and we can see it doesn't seem to be quite as sharp as the 50mm did, but we definitely can see some really nice detail here in the spider web on this plant. Now taking a look at the background, it actually looks a little bit more smoother than the 50mm. The 50mm was a little bit more circular, and this looks a little bit more smooth. I actually think that the bokeh here on the 24mm looks a little bit better than here on the 50mm for this particular picture, but I'm definitely interested to know what you guys have to say about this, but that's just my personal opinion. Let's move down to the next picture. Now we're going to take a look at the sharpness of the 24mm lens when shooting at f2.8. So we're going to zoom in here to this middle brick. Now let's take a look at how this picture looks at f4. As we can see, it looks a little bit more clear and a little bit more smooth here. Now let's check it out at f5.6. Still looks pretty clean and clear. And then lastly, here is f8. So even shooting wide open, the middle of the frame is definitely nice and sharp. Let's take a look at the corners. So here in the corners when shooting at f2.8, we can see it's not quite as sharp. Let's see what it looks like at f4. At f4, we can see it definitely gets a little bit sharper here in the corners of the lens. At f4, we can definitely see that the image gets much sharper here in the edges. Now let's stop down to f5.6, and there really isn't a big clarity difference here between f4 and f5.6. So if you want your pictures to be nice and sharp on the edges, I recommend shooting at f4 or f5.6 with this 24mm lens. Now let's move on to the 50mm. Alright, so here we are with the 50mm lens. We're shooting at f1.8, and we're going to zoom in here to the center of the frame. So at f1.8, the bricks seem to be relatively sharp. We're going to see what it looks like stop down one stop to f2.8. And here at f2.8, we can see a noticeable amount of more detail here in the center of the frame. Let's stop down one more stop to f4. F4, and here at F4, we're not really gaining any much more detail. So now let's go back to F1.8 and take a look at the details in the corners. So zooming in here to the corner, we can instantly see that it's not very sharp at all. It's very, very soft here in the corners of the frames. But let's take a look at these corners stop down to F2.8. So here at F2.8, we can see way more detail than here at F1.8. It's a huge, huge difference. So again, if you guys are looking to get the most clear pictures, I definitely recommend shooting at F2.8 or even slower. If you want your entire picture to be as sharp as possible, I definitely recommend shooting at F2.8 or a little bit slower. Now let's take a look at what it looks like at F4, one stop slower. And it looks like at F4, we still gain a little bit more detail. So to round up, both these lenses are very sharp in the middle, but they definitely get much sharper when stopped down a couple of stops. That's pretty much the case with any lens, but it's definitely something to keep in mind here. For those of you who stuck around to the very end of the video, I want to say thank you guys so much for watching this video. Hope you guys have a fantastic day. And if you could, give this video a thumbs up. It really helps a lot. But that's all I got for you guys in this video, and I'll catch you all in the next one.